Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Have you ever looked at someone while they're either, on stage or giving a speech or entertaining a group of some sort and thought to yourself, wow, they are absolutely just glowing, shining? I often experience this feeling myself when I'm in a theater and I find that I am completely unable to take my eyes off a particular actor. There's just something about that kind of magnetic performance, that kind of presence. It not only captures your attention and your imagination, but it almost seems as though something beyond them, bigger than them, is shining through them. Years ago, when I was working with a voice teacher preparing for an audition, we were singing a song that I knew very well and that I had sung for her many, many times before. But for whatever reason that day, it felt like the music was coming from somewhere else. Yes, the notes were coming from my throat, the words were all coming from my mouth, but it seemed as though all of it was really coming from another place, passing through me as I shared it with my music teacher. After I'd finished, we both just looked at each other and she said, "Well, I don't think we need to do anything more with that today." It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before in singing, as if my main job that moment was to do practically nothing and simply get out of the music's way. And it's a feeling I've only glimpsed once or twice in the 15 years since, but it has remained with me all this time. Now, I don't want to diminish the hard work that singers, actors, and other artists do to perfect and hone their craft. Quite the opposite, in fact. Nothing about that story would have been possible without the hard work and technique that had come from years of study. Rather, I think that when we get the opportunity to do whatever it is we love to do, and when all the pieces come together in ways that we can't quite prepare ourselves for, it's as if the beauty of that moment is really coming from somewhere else. We are simply the conduit through which it passes at that moment. And we, and the people we share that moment with, are transformed by it. I think in a way something similar is happening to Moses in our reading from Exodus today. Israel's greatest prophet is doing what he has been called to do by God. And in that intimate encounter with the divine, he has been transformed by it. As he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. I'm fascinated by this little detail, particularly because at this point in the story, Moses has had multiple conversations with God. He's climbed and descended Mount Sinai at least twice, to say nothing of all the other conversations he has had with God up to this point. But now, for whatever reason, Moses is changed by his encounter with God. The skin of his face is shining so radiantly that the Israelites need him to cover it, because they are afraid of it. And quite frankly, they have every right to be. You may recall that this story comes just after the incident with the golden calf. Moses, who had been up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, returned to the people to find that they were worshiping a graven image instead of God. In his anger, Moses smashed the tablets of the 10 Commandments he'd received from God, and then went on to calm God's anger towards the people. Sometime later, where our reading for this morning cuts in, Moses reclimbs Mount Sinai and is given new tablets written in God's own hand and brings them down to the people. But this time, his face is shining with what? We don't actually know. We're only told it's because Moses had been speaking to the Lord, and that the Israelites are afraid of this light from God that they see reflected on Moses' face. Perhaps that they are afraid that God, through Moses, is coming in anger. That would make sense given everything that's just happened. But no anger follows. Rather, it seems that this shining radiance is meant to be a reminder of God's eternal presence among the people, with Moses the prophet doing what he has been called to do, serving as a conduit for that light. This light is not meant as a threat to be held over the people. Rather, as Thomas Curry says, the unbearable brightness of Moses' face is the residue of God's steadfast love for Israel and God's faithfulness to them in the face of betrayal and even death. End quote. Despite everything Israel has done, God has chosen to stay with them and be their God. Their task, in return, is to follow God's commandments and show God's love to the world. Now, if anyone has ever read on from Exodus to the book of Numbers, you'll know that Israel doesn't always get that task quite right. But through it all, God's love for them never leaves. Something similar happens with Jesus and 3 of his disciples in the event the church has come to call the Transfiguration. Following the example of Moses, Jesus climbs a mountain, and there his appearance is changed. His face and his clothes are gleaming, and all 4 of them are visited by Moses and Elijah before a voice from heaven proclaims, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." Now, there's a lot going on in this short scene, but a clear connection is being made to Moses and his encounter with God. But there's a crucial difference here. Where Moses' shining face was the result of his encounter with God, Jesus' transfiguration comes from within himself as the Son of God. Moreover, the presence of Moses and Elijah there on that mountain connect Jesus to the law and the prophets who came before him, showing that Jesus himself is their fulfillment. And in case all of this wasn't enough for Peter, John, and James, the voice from heaven states without a doubt just who Jesus is, the Son of God, the chosen one, to whom they should listen. But, as is so often the case, the disciples don't quite get it. So many times in the Gospels, Jesus tells them not to say anything about who he is, but they go and tell the story anyway. Here, however, there's no such ban on spreading this good news, but Peter, John, and James keep silent about what they've just experienced. Perhaps they're too overwhelmed by their encounter with God. Perhaps, like the Israelites, they are so afraid of what they've seen and learned that they put a veil over their speech, just like the one Moses used to cover his face with. This, of course, misses the point. Jesus calls his disciples not to keep silent, but to spread the good news of God to everyone, the orphan, the widow, the outcast, all those people who find themselves on the margins of society. And the same is true for us here and now. The journey to the top of the mountain to witness the Transfiguration is an invitation into God's mission for us, a mission of reconciliation and justice that brings all of us into a closer communion with God. It's no mistake that so many churches, including our own, are designed to have their altars slightly elevated from the rest of the nave. As we approach God's table for communion, we too are climbing that mountain in order to have an encounter with the divine, with Jesus himself. And as we descend back down and move outside these walls and into the world, we are being tasked with spreading the joy of that encounter to everyone we meet, to make the love of God known, a love that abides without end, despite all our own faults and flaws. Epiphany is the season of light, and so it's right to end this season with this particular story, so that we may carry the light of God through Lent and into our joyful Eastertide and beyond. Amen.